Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for your time. My name is Moira. I've grown up in Los Altos and am back in town after graduating from college in May. Thank you. So my third point is the formation of a commission that would specifically be composed of people most affected by policing with the power to A, fire police officers that have complaints of misconduct and oversee hiring of new officers, and B, the ability to investigate complaints of police misconduct. It is crucial that this board have meaningful power rather than just be limited to making recommendations. I know this council likes to hear of other cities who have established precedents, so some cities who have boards with such power include Oakland, SF, and Newark. Newark in New Jersey has the power to issue subpoenas to ensure that discipline sticks, and it has the power to audit the police department's policies and practices. 7 of the 11 members of the board are nominated by community and civil rights organizations instead of the mayor or police chief. My fourth point is that additionally, this board should have input in the union negotiations with the police. Police unions are able to protect officers with records of misconduct charges and destroy said records. There's a fine line between a union ensuring its members are fairly employed and preventing union members from being held accountable. In an ideal world, I'd like for the union contracts to be rewritten to be 3 parties of the city, union, and members of the civilian commission. That being said, I understand that currently this contract is written between the 2 parties of the city and the union. Given that the city is supposed to represent its residents, I am asking that the city listen to a board such as the one that I'm suggesting when it comes to union negotiations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Moira.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, my Zoom name is a little different, but my name is Maya Attaria, and I'm a lifelong resident of Los Altos, a graduate of Los Altos High School and Stanford University. I just graduated, and I'm here as a part of Justice Vanguard, and I want to speak on behalf of our demands. And first, I want to just speak on a couple things that came up for me based on some of the previous comments. Growing up in Los Altos, especially as a queer person and a person of color, police have not made me feel safe. The people who have made me feel safe have been, close friends, other people of color, other queer folks. And I want to say, as a South Asian person, and also as someone who myself is a survivor of intimate partner violence, and who has worked at a nonprofit that supports South Asian survivors of intimate partner violence in the Bay Area, in my own experience and in that work, I have seen the way that that police involvement in domestic violence situations creates barriers for especially immigrant women of color who might have language barriers. For example, a lot of support that can be made available to domestic violence survivors when we have the system that requires police interaction and requires police reports to be part of that process. So for example, let's say I'm an immigrant woman and I'm here on my spouse's visa and my spouse is abusing me. In order for me to get protection, for me to leave my spouse and not be deported, I need to have a police report. And this is just one of many examples of how policing being part of our support for domestic violence survivors is actually a negative thing. So I just wanted to add that perspective in real quick. Going back to Justice Vanguard demands that I wanted to talk about, we are very much against the civilian task force that the council and particularly our mayor and vice mayor proposed around a month ago. We found that to be very toothless and didn't actually give civilians the right to hold our policing forces accountable in meaningful ways. What we want to see instead is a community control board. And so what this would be is a board of folks who are most impacted by policing and negatively impacted by policing in our community. So especially Black folks, other people of color, queer and trans people in our communities. And like another person who spoke said before, our community is not just people who live here, but people who work here, go to school here, come through here. And this council must have the power to fire police officers based on either complaints or records that show racial discrimination, as we see overall is very prevalent in our police department. Citizens and this council must have a strong seat at the table during union negotiations, because I want to echo other people, and I don't have confidence that Chris Jordan will represent our needs in this union negotiation process. And we know that the next round of negotiations is coming up. I think you all have said that it will start by September. So we would really, it would be a very great surge of confidence for our citizens if we are actually able to meaningfully have a role in that. Thank you.
All right, Yiran, go right ahead and welcome.
Hi, my name is Yiran Liu, and I'm a resident of Los Altos and a member of Justice Vanguard. I want to reiterate our demand for a community control board that is composed of community members who are most harmed by policing, and that has the power to hire and fire police, to participate in determining the police budget, and to be an equal arbiter with veto power in negotiations of the city's contract with the Los Altos Peace Officers Association. I want to emphasize that we are not calling for a task force or a civilian review board that can only review and make recommendations regarding policing. Such a task force or review board would have no true power or influence in truly transforming policing in Los Altos. These civilian review boards that have existed across the country for many, many decades have had essentially no effect on truly holding police accountable for any misconduct or violent behavior. I also want to comment on the current memorandum of understanding between the City of Los Altos and the Los Altos Peace Officers Association. The current contract is abysmal. It has absolutely no mention of how civilian contracts or cases of officer misconduct are handled. It has absolutely no mention of any form of disciplinary procedures. It has absolutely no mention of civilian oversight or control. It enables Los Altos police to completely evade accountability for their actions. If my friend were to be harassed or assaulted tomorrow, or even worse, killed by a Los Altos police officer, there would be no path to accountability or consequences for that officer as a result of their actions. Also, currently, the union contract pays 5% bonus to school resource officers, which we have heard over and over again on this call, harm both students and staff in our local high schools. It also pays these 5% bonuses to those who are in hostage negotiations or SWAT teams, further supporting the militarization of our cities. So in summary, I again reiterate the demand for a community control board that has the power to hire and fire, to determine the police budget, and be an equal arbiter in the union contract. Thank you.
I'm a resident of Los Altos. I'm a graduate of Los Altos High School, and I'm a student at UCLA. I'm also a member of Justice Vanguard. I want to briefly reinforce Justice Vanguard's demand of creating a community power board that comprised of queer folks and people of color, because this implementation will be a huge step towards both listening to the community and having the community help make real and justified decisions for the city we live in. I'm glad that there are those in Los Altos who feel protected by the police, but we need to turn our attention to the ones that don't feel safe by the police. Specifically,
Comment. I, as a white woman of privilege and resident of Los Altos, feel uncomfortable hearing how students and people of color are treated in this community. I support the demands of Justice Vanguard, specifically the demand of a community control board. This is an opportunity to rethink the role of the police and to change the current broken system. I hope the mayor, city manager, and council members are taking this seriously and act soon and not wait until 2023. Otherwise, they will be unsuccessful.
My name is Ludka. I'm a resident of Los Altos Hills. I still think that the Hills people have some say in what's happening in Los Altos. Hopefully you see the point. I'm an educator. I'm a wife of an African-American man. I'm a mom to a Black toddler boy. Forgive me if my note is not completely coherent. I was writing it while the baby was crying. I'm here with an informal group of adults from Los Altos and Los Altos Hills. We call ourselves, I think, Reimagining Community and Safety. And I also would like to express support to Justice Vanguard and say I wholly agree with their and other people's call to remove school resource officers from schools and to cancel police department contracts with schools on their end. To end there and reallocate that money into mental health resources. I also support the suggestion to establish a community control board, not review board, but control board, with power to fire and lead investigation into officers, along with opportunity to contribute to the upcoming contract negotiations with the police union. I also strongly believe we should establish a program like Cahoots and divert some % of the calls to them. Supposedly, it could save us up to, I don't know, 10 to 15% of the current police budget, which could be used better. I would like to remind the residents who have great experiences with the police, who might also often have some that daddy. That might also often have something to do with their whiteness or their privilege. Let's not please dismiss the experiences of marginalized people just because your experiences have been good. I'm also supporting the calls for having more data and more transparency about the nature of the stops and arrests, where those
Hello,
stops take place,
Ludka.
racial breakdown,
Thank
age,
you
and
for your
resident,
comments.
resident data. And I urge you to get the same data for, collect the same data for SROs. We also need to establish ourselves as a sanctuary city. And if the homeowners are so worried about property and crime, and most of our stops are for of non-residents, I believe it is then our responsibility to help our neighboring towns. I also wish the city council and police department made their websites much more transparent.
Judge Cordell, looks like we lost Ludka.
Okay, all right. Next question, can we please also get data on police stops, not just citations and arrests?
Yes, and I had referenced that earlier also. We're required to start the reporting in 2022 or the collection of data in 2022. Unfortunately, there's a lot of data that's going to be required to be collected. We do not currently have the technology to do that, but we're exploring ways to do it in advance of the requirement.
Data
Thank you.
on
And
stops
just so
will be
people know,
collected
this
starting in
the AB
2022.
953 requires that for
AB
every stop, be it a
953.
pedestrian stop or a traffic stop, the person stopped must be identified by race, by age, by gender. The data must include why the person was stopped, whether or not the person was searched, whether or not the person, if it's a traffic stop, was ordered out of the car, and why, whether or not any evidence was turned up as a result of the search, and what was the final disposition of the stop. So that has to be done for every single stop, pedestrian and traffic stop, by every law enforcement agency in California. And all the data is then reported to the state attorney general, and that office is required to make a report once a year with all of that data for all law enforcement agencies in the country so that everyone can see all of the data. All right, we'll now go to one last question. And third one here is, what is the Los Altos process for handling complaints? How does citizen oversight play in this process? It kind of makes this question has an assumption that there is some sort of citizen or civilian oversight in Los Altos. So Chief, do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, we have our complaint process is outlined on our website where people anyone can file a complaint, formal complaint, and once the complaint is received, we do assign it to typically a supervisor for a low level type complaint. We've had a number of occasions where I think the complaints required maybe an individual that maybe could be a little more independent, and certainly we want to give that appearance that when people do make complaints, and if there's significant complaints, if we don't feel that we can handle them internally here, we'll assign them out, and we've done that a number of times. Once the complaint disposition is received, it does come to me, and typically if there is whatever the disposition is, that disposition is forwarded to the city manager.
Right.
And
So
obviously, if I'm sorry,
no, go right ahead, Chief.
If it's a situation as you saw in our data where it's a sustained complaint, I'll work with our city attorneys and our HR department to follow through with whatever discipline is recommended.
Thank you, Chief. So I just want to make clear that there is no independent civilian oversight in Los Altos. There is, for example, in San Jose, where I was the independent police auditor. So when complaints come in, they are investigated by your internal affairs unit. And then whatever their investigation shows, that unit makes a finding, and then that determination, if it's the officer has engaged in bad behavior, goes to you, chief, and you make a decision about what happens in terms of discipline.
Goodbye from Los Altos. Los Altos Politico, Los Altos News Fix.